The morning sun shined bright as the moving truck pulled up to the small two-story house on Maple Street. After 5 years of saving every penny from her military pension, Nancy finally had the keys to her very own home. Her daughter Abby, just 17 and full of dreams despite being in a wheelchair since birth, couldn't stop smiling as she looked at their new place. "Look, Mom, the doorways are actually wide enough," Abby exclaimed, wheeling herself up the custom ramp to the front door without struggling for the first time in her life. Nancy watched her daughter with tears in her eyes. They'd moved 8 times during Nancy's 15 years in the Army. Rental after rental, always facing the same problems. Narrow doorways, no ramps, bathrooms too small for Abby's wheelchair. But this house was different. Nancy had worked with the builders to make sure everything was perfect for Abby. Wider hallways, a roll-in shower, lowered countertops in the kitchen. "I can reach the sink without your help," Abby called from inside the house, her voice filled with the kind of joy only independence can bring. Pine Creek Estate seemed like a dream come true. The streets were smooth and well-maintained, perfect for Abby's wheelchair. The community pool had a special lift so Abby could swim with the other teens. And best of all, the local high school was just 3 blocks away. Their new neighbors stopped by throughout the day, bringing welcome gifts and warm smiles. Old Mr. Chen from next door brought over homemade dumplings. The Johnson family across the street came with their teenage son who went to the same high school Abby would attend. "You're going to love it here," Mrs. Johnson said, helping Nancy unpack boxes in the kitchen. Such a friendly neighborhood, but her smile faded slightly as she glanced out the window at a woman taking pictures of Nancy's front yard. "That's Veronica," Mrs. Johnson whispered. "She runs the homeowners association. Just be careful around her. Some folks call her HOA Karen behind her back. She takes the rules very seriously." Nancy nodded politely but didn't think much of. After surviving 2 tours overseas, how bad could one neighborhood busybody be? She found out the very next morning when she opened her front door to find a bright pink notice taped to it. "Violation, unapproved lawn ornament. All exterior decorations must be approved by the HOA board. Remove immediately to avoid fines." Nancy stared at the small ceramic frog sitting by their new ramp, the last gift Abby's grandfather had given her before he passed away the year before. "What's wrong, Mom?" Abby asked, wheeling up behind her. Nancy quickly folded the notice and stuffed it in her pocket. Nothing was going to ruin their first full day in their dream home, but deep down she had a feeling their battle was just beginning. 3 days after moving in, Nancy decided to visit the HOA office to talk about the violation notice. She found the small office at the community center, where Veronica sat behind a large desk covered with neatly organized folders. "I'm here about this notice," Nancy said, placing the pink paper on the desk. "The frog by our ramp has special meaning to my daughter. Her grandfather gave it to her before he passed away last year." Veronica barely looked up from her computer. "Rules are rules. Section 8, Paragraph 3 clearly states all exterior decorations must be approved by the board." Her voice was cold as ice. She reached for a camera on her desk. "I've already documented the violation. You have 48 hours to remove it before the first fine is issued." Nancy took a deep breath. After 15 years in the military, she knew when to pick her battles. "How do I submit a request for approval?" Veronica slid a thick packet across the desk. "Fill out forms A through F. Include 3 photos from different angles. The board meets on the first Monday of each month to review requests." "But that's almost 3 weeks away," Nancy pointed out. "Then I suggest you remove the item until you receive approval," Veronica said with a thin smile. Walking home, Nancy spotted at least 5 houses with garden decorations, flamingos, gnomes, even a large stone turtle. Something didn't add up. The following week, Nancy attended her first community meeting at the clubhouse. About 30 neighbors gathered in fold-out chairs as Veronica stood at the front with a laser pointer and a slideshow of violations. "The Rodriguez family has once again placed their garbage cans in view of the street," Veronica announced, showing a photo of a nearly hidden trash can. "The Wongs have unapproved plants in their flower beds." Another click showed perfectly normal-looking flowers. Nancy noticed something odd. All the violations came from the newer families or people who looked different from Veronica, and her 3 friends who sat in the front row nodding along. Then an older man raised his hand. "I'd like to request approval for a small ramp at my front door. My mother is coming to live with me and she can't manage the steps anymore." Nancy watched as Veronica's face tightened. "We must maintain the aesthetic appeal of our community," Veronica said sharply. "Ramps decrease property values. Perhaps your mother could use the back entrance?" The man looked down, embarrassed. Nancy felt her blood begin to boil. On the walk home, Nancy's neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, caught up with her. "Now you see what we're dealing with," she whispered. "Veronica has run this neighborhood like her personal kingdom for 8 years. Nobody stands up to her because she's friends with half the police department, and her husband is some big-shot lawyer." Nancy thought about Abby, who was finally enjoying the freedom of a home built for her needs. She thought about the kind older man, embarrassed in front of everyone for wanting to help his mother. "Some people mistake kindness for weakness," Nancy said quietly. "In the army we had a saying, 'Choose your battles wisely, but once you choose, fight to win.'" She looked back at the clubhouse where Veronica was locking up. "I think I just found my next battle." 2 months flew by as Nancy and Abby settled into their new home. Abby had made friends at school and joined the debate team, but at home, she was struggling. Dr. Parker, her physical therapist for the past 5 years, visited their house and noticed something concerning. "Abby's upper body strength is decreasing," she told Nancy during their kitchen table chat after the session. "At your old place, she used the community gym equipment 3 times a week. She needs regular exercise to maintain her independence." Dr. Parker sketched a simple set of parallel bars for their backyard. Nothing fancy, just 2 bars where she can practice supporting her weight. It would really help her. The next day, Nancy filled out all the HOA forms requesting permission to install the bars. She included Dr. Parker's medical recommendation, detailed drawings and photos of where they would go, hidden from street view behind their flowering bushes. 3 weeks passed with no response. Nancy called the HOA office daily, but Veronica was always in a meeting or just stepped out. Finally, Nancy received a letter. "Request denied due to incomplete paperwork. But I filled out everything exactly as required," Nancy told her neighbor Mrs. Johnson over coffee. Mrs. Johnson sighed. "That's her favorite trick. She'll claim pages are missing or signatures aren't right." Nancy resubmitted everything, this time making copies of each page and taking photos of the complete packet before handing it in. She also sent digital copies to the HOA email address with delivery confirmation. Another month passed. Abby had fallen twice trying to get from her bed to her chair. Her arms just weren't strong enough anymore. The second denial came with a new excuse. Potential structural concerns. Nancy called Tom, an old Army buddy who now worked as a lawyer specializing in disability rights. "They can't do this," Tom explained over the phone after hearing the whole story. "The Americans with Disabilities Act is crystal clear. Reasonable. Accommodations must be made, especially when medically necessary. And these bars don't even affect the structure of anything. They're basically fancy garden posts." Armed with legal knowledge, Nancy requested a special meeting with the full HOA board. 5 board members sat behind a long table, with Veronica in the center looking annoyed. "The law requires you to approve medically necessary equipment," Nancy explained calmly, placing a folder of documentation in front of each member. "My daughter needs these parallel bars to maintain her independence. They'll be hidden from view and won't affect any structures." One board member, an older woman, nodded sympathetically, but Veronica cut in before she could speak. "We have procedures. For a reason," Veronica snapped. "And our legal team has advised us that your request falls outside ADA requirements." Nancy kept her cool. "May I ask which legal team provided that opinion? Because I've consulted with a disability rights attorney who says otherwise." Veronica's face flushed red. "This meeting is over. We'll review your case again at the next regular session." Walking home, Nancy felt her military training kicking in. In the Army, she'd learned how to fight battles on multiple fronts. It was time to start documenting everything. Every email, every phone call, every piece of paper. If this was going to be a war, she would be prepared. Meanwhile, Abby watched from her window as the neighbor kids played basketball in their driveways. All she wanted was to be strong enough to take care of herself. Was that really too much to ask? The first warm Saturday of spring brought everyone outdoors. Kids rode bikes, couples walked dogs, and neighbors chatted over fence lines. Nancy headed to the grocery store, list in hand. "I'll only be gone an hour," she told Abby, who was watching a cooking show on TV. "Need anything else?" Abby shook her head. "I'm good. Actually, I might go get the mail while you're out." Nancy paused at the door. For years, the simple act of checking the mailbox had been impossible for Abby. Their new house was 3 blocks from the community mailboxes, and the path there had always been too bumpy for her wheelchair. But last week, Nancy had hired contractors to install a smooth concrete path and a gentle ramp at the mailbox area. The county had approved it, and though the HOA paperwork was still pending review, Nancy had gone ahead with the installation. "That would be great," Nancy said, trying to hide how much this small bit of independence meant. "The key is on the hook." 20 minutes later, Abby enjoyed the sunshine as she wheeled herself down the smooth new path. Birds sang in the trees and neighborhood. Kids waved as they rode past on bikes. For the first time in her life, she felt like just another teenager doing a simple chore. At the mailbox area, she easily rolled up the gentle ramp and reached their box without struggling. The simple joy of putting the key in the lock by herself made her smile. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Abby turned to see Veronica marching toward her, designer purse swinging from her arm, face twisted with anger. "Just getting our mail, ma'am," Abby replied politely, closing the mailbox and putting the small stack of envelopes in her lap. "On that," Veronica pointed at the ramp with a manicured finger. "That unauthorized structure. Who gave you permission to build this monstrosity?" Abby felt her cheeks grow hot. "My mom got county permits. She submitted the HOA paperwork too." "Well, it wasn't approved." Veronica stepped closer, blocking Abby's path home. "This is defacement of community property. I could have your family evicted for this." A few neighbors had stopped to watch. Mrs. Johnson stepped off her porch across the street, phone in hand, looking concerned. "Please excuse me," Abby said quietly, trying to wheel around Veronica. "I need to get home." Veronica moved to block her again. "You're not going anywhere until your mother comes to deal with this. This is trespassing." "Ma'am, I live here," Abby explained, keeping her voice calm like her mom had taught her. "I have every right to use this ramp to access my mail." Something changed in Veronica's eyes then. A strange, frightening shift. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small black handgun. "You are on HOA property," she said, her voice suddenly cold and steady. "And you are trespassing. Move away from that illegal ramp right now." Abby froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The gun wasn't pointed directly at her, but Veronica held it where Abby could clearly see it. Across the street, Mrs. Johnson gasped and ducked behind a tree, frantically tapping on her phone. 2 teenage boys on bikes skidded to a stop, eyes wide with shock. "My mom is a military veteran," Abby said, her voice shaking slightly. "She taught me to stay calm in dangerous situations. And this is definitely a dangerous situation, ma'am. Please put the gun away before someone gets hurt." Veronica's hand trembled slightly, but her eyes remained cold. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. This neighborhood was perfect before your kind moved in. Breaking rules. Demanding special treatment." "I just wanted to get the mail," Abby whispered, tears filling her eyes. The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Mrs. Johnson stepped out from behind the tree. "Police are coming," she called out. "I also called Nancy. Veronica, put that gun down right now." Veronica's head snapped toward Mrs. Johnson, her face a mask of rage. In that moment of distraction, another neighbor, Mr. Chen from next door, quietly approached from behind. "That's enough now," he said firmly, his kind face serious as he carefully positioned himself between Abby and Veronica. The young lady just wanted her mail. There's no need for this. The first police car rounded the corner, followed closely by Nancy's old blue sedan. The look on Nancy's face as she jumped from her car and saw the scene unfolding would haunt the neighbors for years to come. It was the look of a mother's worst fear come to life. 3 police cars surrounded the mailbox area, lights flashing. Nancy abandoned her car halfway up the block and ran the rest of the way, her heart pounding in her ears. "Abby!" she screamed, pushing through the small crowd that had gathered. Abby sat in her wheelchair, pale but calm, with Mr. Chen standing protectively beside her. When she saw her mom, tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "I'm okay, Mom," she said as Nancy knelt beside her, checking for injuries. "Mr. Chen stepped in to help me." Nancy hugged her daughter tight, then turned to the elderly neighbor. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Across the small courtyard, 2 officers were speaking with Veronica, who gestured wildly, her face red with anger. A 3rd officer carefully held her purse, removing the small handgun with gloved hands. "Nancy," she turned to see Officer Pete Martinez walking toward them. They'd served together years ago before he left the army to join the local police force. "Pete," Nancy said, relief washing over her. "Thank goodness you're here." "We've got multiple witnesses," Pete explained, nodding toward Mrs. Johnson and several other neighbors giving statements to another officer. "They all say she pulled a gun on your daughter over using a ramp to get mail." Nancy felt a cold fury settle in her chest. "She threatened my child with a deadly weapon for getting the mail." Pete's expression hardened. "She doesn't have a permit for the gun either. This is serious, Nancy. Aggravated assault, brandishing a weapon, threatening a minor, or we're taking her in." As if on cue, the 2 officers began leading Veronica toward a patrol car. She twisted in their grip, her face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. Do you know who my husband is? He'll have your badges." She spotted Nancy and Abby. "This is your fault. You and your special needs brat. You think your wheelchair gives you special rights." The gathering crowd gasped. One of the officers gently pushed Veronica's head down as she was placed in the back of the patrol car. "I need to get Abby home," Nancy said quietly to Pete. "She's been through enough." Pete nodded. "We'll need her statement, but it can wait until tomorrow. I'll stop by in the morning." As Nancy wheeled Abby toward home, neighbors stepped forward, one by one. "I'm so sorry this happened," Mrs. Johnson said, walking alongside them. "We should have stood up to her years ago. She threatened to report my flower beds to the city last summer," another neighbor added, joining their slow procession. "She told my kids they couldn't play basketball after 5 p.m., even though the HOA rules say 9 p.m., said a father of 2. By the time they reached their driveway, nearly 20 neighbors had joined them, each with their own story of Veronica's bullying and intimidation. "We were all too scared to stand up to her," explained an older woman Nancy hadn't met before. "Her husband is a big corporate lawyer, and she's friends with the mayor. We just tried to stay off her radar." "Well, she's definitely on the police's radar now," Nancy said grimly, helping Abby up their front ramp. Inside, Abby finally broke down, sobbing in her mother's arms. "I was so scared, Mom. But I remembered what you taught me about staying calm. When someone is acting crazy," Nancy held her daughter close. "You did everything right. I'm so proud of you." Later that evening, as Abby finally slept, Nancy sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, medical documentation, ADA regulations, copies of all her HOA submissions, and Pete's business card. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with text, messages from neighbors offering support and information. "Mess with my child," she whispered to herself, organizing the papers into neat files, "and you'll find out exactly who you're dealing with." The police station buzzed with activity as Nancy sat across from Detective Williams, a stern woman with kind eyes. Pete had brought her in to file the official complaint. "We found some concerning things," Detective Williams explained, opening a folder. "The gun wasn't registered, and when we ran Ms. Harrington's background, we discovered 3 previous complaints against her, though none involved weapons." Nancy leaned forward. "What kind of complaints?" "Harassment, mostly. One neighbor claimed she repeatedly trespassed on their property to take photos of supposed violations. Another reported verbal threats when they painted their door an unapproved color. The detective shook her head. All 3 complaints were withdrawn suddenly. "Let me guess," Nancy said. "Her lawyer husband got involved." Detective Williams nodded. "But this time is different. Threatening a disabled minor with a firearm, multiple witnesses. This isn't going away." As Nancy left the station, her phone rang. It was Tom, her lawyer friend. "Nancy, I've been looking into your HOA situation. This goes beyond the gun incident. Their systematic denial of reasonable accommodations violates federal law. The Americans with Disabilities Act is crystal clear." "What are you suggesting?" Nancy asked, starting her car. "A 2-pronged approach. First, support the criminal case against Veronica. Second, we file a civil lawsuit against both her personally and the entire HOA board for discrimination, failure to provide reasonable accommodations, and creating a hostile living environment." That evening, Nancy explained everything to Abby over dinner. "So we're going to court?" Abby asked, pushing food around her plate. "We're standing up not just for ourselves but for everyone who's been bullied by her," Nancy explained. "Remember Mr. Patel, who wanted a ramp for his mother? And the Rodriguez family, who were constantly getting violations? This affects the whole neighborhood." Abby nodded slowly. "I don't want anyone else to go through what happened to me." The following week was a whirlwind. Tom helped Nancy file the civil lawsuit. Local news vans appeared on their street after someone tipped them off about the HOA gun incident. Nancy declined interviews, but many neighbors spoke out, sharing years of pent-up frustrations about Veronica's reign of terror. "Family threatened over disability access," read the headlines. Disability rights organizations reached out offering support. The story spread across social media, generating outrage and calls for HOA reform. Meanwhile, Veronica's expensive lawyer husband discovered he was facing an opponent he hadn't expected. During Nancy's last 5 years in the military, she'd worked in the legal affairs office, handling complex logistics for international operations while studying military law. She understood the legal system from the inside. "They've offered a settlement," Tom told Nancy 2 weeks later, sounding impressed. "They want this to go away quietly." Nancy shook her head. "This isn't about money. It's about making sure this never happens to another family." The preliminary hearing for Veronica's criminal case packed the small courtroom. Nancy sat with Abby in the front row, surrounded by supportive neighbors. Veronica entered with her husband, both dressed in expensive suits, their faces set in confident expressions. That confidence crumbled when the prosecutor presented the evidence. The unregistered gun, the multiple witness statements, photos of the wheelchair ramp that had triggered Veronica's rage, and most damaging of all, security camera footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera that had captured the entire confrontation. The courtroom fell silent as they watched. Veronica clearly pulled the gun from her purse while blocking a teenage girl in a wheelchair who was simply trying to go home after checking the mail. The judge's face hardened as he set trial dates and denied the defense's request for reduced bail. "Your client threatened a minor with a deadly weapon over a wheelchair ramp," he stated flatly. "This court takes such actions very seriously." Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Nancy shielded Abby from the cameras but paused briefly before getting in their car. "All we want is to live in a community where everyone feels welcome and safe," she said simply. "No one should face discrimination or threats for needing accessibility, accommodations." As they drove home, Abby looked thoughtfully at her mother. "You know what's weird? If she had just approved the parallel bars in our backyard, none of this would have happened." Nancy smiled sadly. "Sometimes people are so focused on enforcing rules that they forget about basic human decency. But now everyone knows exactly who they were messing with." Summer arrived in Pine Creek Estates, bringing warm breezes and unexpected changes. The community bulletin board outside the clubhouse, once covered with violation notices, now displayed a colorful banner. "Community Garden Day, everyone welcome." 3 months had passed since that terrible day at the mailboxes. Veronica now lived under house arrest, an electronic monitor on her ankle, awaiting her criminal trial. Her husband had moved out, filing for divorce after the scandal damaged his law firm's reputation. The HOA board had undergone a complete transformation. 4 members had resigned in shame when the civil lawsuit revealed they had deliberately lost disability accommodation requests and enforced rules unfairly based on personal relationships. The new board, led by Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Chen, had immediately approved all of Nancy's requests and more. "I can't believe it," Abby said, watching from their front porch as workers installed the parallel bars in their backyard garden. The simple metal structure was partially hidden by flowering bushes, just as Nancy had originally proposed. "Sometimes it takes something terrible to make good changes happen," Nancy replied, squeezing her daughter's shoulder. Across the street, Mr. Patel waved from his newly installed front door ramp, where his elderly mother sat enjoying the sunshine. The community center hosted its first ever accessibility forum, bringing in experts to review every aspect of the neighborhood. The swimming pool got a new lift system, sidewalks were repaired, the clubhouse bathroom was renovated for wheelchair access. Most importantly, people's attitudes changed. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now spoke up. Families that had kept to themselves began joining community events. The division Veronica had created through fear and intimidation melted away as people realized they wanted the same things: a safe, welcoming neighborhood where everyone belonged. One warm evening, as Nancy helped Abby practice on her new parallel bars, Mrs. Johnson came by with a proposal. "The community newsletter wants to feature your story," she explained. "Not the scary parts, but how Abby's courage has transformed our neighborhood." Abby looked uncertain. "I don't know if I did anything brave. I was terrified." "Courage isn't about not being scared," Nancy reminded her. "It's about doing what's right even when you are scared." The following week, Abby found herself sitting with the neighborhood teens at the community center, sharing her experience. What started as a simple conversation grew into something more: a support group where kids with various challenges could talk openly without judgment. "My brother uses a hearing aid and kids at school tease him," one boy shared. "I have diabetes and hate when people stare at me testing my blood sugar," added a girl around Abby's age. Each story strengthened their bond, and soon they were meeting weekly, calling themselves the Differently Abled Club. As for the legal cases, they proceeded exactly as Nancy had planned. The criminal court had little sympathy for someone who had threatened a disabled teenager with an unregistered weapon. The civil case exposed years of discriminatory practices that violated federal law. The final HOA meeting of summer was held on the community green rather than the stuffy clubhouse. Another new change: lawn chairs dotted the grass as neighbors gathered to hear the latest updates. "The parallel bars installation is complete at the family's home," announced Mrs. Johnson, checking items off her list. "The community center renovation is ahead of schedule, and I'm happy to report that our neighborhood has been nominated for a County Accessibility Award." Applause rippled through the crowd. Someone called out, "None of this would have happened without Nancy and Abby." All eyes turned to where they sat near the back. Nancy felt her face grow warm at the sudden attention. "I just wanted what was right for my daughter," she said simply. "And we all got a better neighborhood because of it," Mr. Chen added, smiling. As the meeting concluded, several kids wheeled Abby toward the ice cream truck that always visited on meeting nights. Nancy watched her daughter laughing with her new friends, marveling at how much had changed in just a few months. The neighborhood security guard, a retired police officer, stopped beside her chair. "Heard the news? Veronica's lawyer tried to get a plea deal on the criminal charges. Judge turned it down flat. Said threatening a disabled minor was too serious." Nancy nodded, feeling no joy at the woman's downfall, only relief that justice was being served. "You know," the guard continued, "folks around here talk about you. They say nobody should mess with a military mom who knows the law." Nancy smiled slightly, watching as Abby confidently maneuvered her wheelchair through the crowd, stronger now thanks to her daily exercise. "It wasn't about me," she said quietly. "It was about my daughter." Turns out, nobody should mess with a girl who spent her whole life fighting for independence either. The setting sun cast a golden glow over Pine Creek Estates,